Hello there, Patreon folks. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast Patreon. I have a fun bonus episode for you today. We are going to talk about gossip. I know, gossip is fun. Specifically, this is some outtakes from my conversation with Kayleigh Donaldson, which was part of episode, I actually have to look that up because I don't remember numbers, episode number 576, which dropped on August 18th, 2023. This is some extras where we took a little side trip into the profitability of hate in gossip and celebrity news. We're going to talk about Meghan Markle, Amber Heard, Lizzo, and how much money can be made feeding gossip haterade. It's kind of wild. Please note that we are going to talk a little bit about obsessive fandoms, stalking, harassment, misogynoir, trafficking, and child exploitation on YouTube, TikTok, and back in the day, mom blogs. I would love to know your thoughts, what you think of this particular little bonus episode. You can find us in the Patreon Discord, or you can find us on Patreon. Inside the entry for this particular post, there's a comment section. I'd love to know what you think. Let's do this bonus episode. I understand, for example, with the British royal family, which I know is another topic you talk a lot about. Oh. Okay, so I understand that there are people, and I've seen them. They're terrifying. They hate Meghan Markle. I don't have that much hatred for people who've actually done things to me personally. Like, that is so much hate energy. And it's terrifying because you can weaponize that by paying a certain number of people to just start that little tiny tornado going. And that's what happened with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. He had a firm paying people, I believe, to come up with the talking points. And then one YouTube video becomes 5. And then that becomes a very lucrative area in which to start making your own videos or posts or essays or whatever, TikToks, whatever. That becomes lucrative. So not only do you have people who are ready to fall all over themselves to defend this person as if it's like a personal stake. Like it's a compromise of their identity if they don't stand up for Johnny Depp, which really then becomes profitable. And then we're all fucked.
Definitely. I think that's another aspect that doesn't really get talked about. One, for mainstream media, it's extremely profitable to be misogynistic. Look at the sidebar of shame on the Daily Mail. Look at TMZ. I'm actually writing about TMZ right now and just digging into the ruthless efficiency of their model, because you'll notice how many celebrities do something or accuse something of something terrible, and the sources run to TMZ. It's happening with Lizzo, happening with Jonathan Majors, to a much lesser extent of abuse. Ariana Grande's team are running there to be like, well, let's see how this relationship goes up. But it definitely happened when they had both left their spouses. Okay, honey, if you say so. But also, people were making Etsy merchandise of Amber Heard's trauma. You can buy fucking pillowcases of Amber Heard's crying face. There are people on YouTube, body language experts, who I think are some of the most insidious a-holes in the entire concept of the sphere. Wannabe lawyers, the true crime circle, which is a whole other level of seedy in this. People made a lot of money, not just from smearing Amber Heard, but smearing Megan Thee Stallion, going after Meghan Markle, currently going after Evan Rachel Wood, who is suing Marilyn Manson.
Yep.
FKA Twigs, who's suing Shia LaBeouf.
Yep.
And then women who aren't even accusing men of this behavior. A lot of them really hate Jada Pinkett Smith, for instance. They seem to think it's the Medea concept of, she's trying to, destroy this man, this poor innocent man that she's been married to for 2 decades. So there's so much money in this. And so much money in hate in general. Like, I live on an island that is currently dominated by transphobes. And I am painfully aware I don't even know where to begin, but I'm so painfully aware that I could pack my career in tomorrow, run to the Telegraph and complain about how I was cancelled for being gender critical, and I could make so much money. And that's what you see with, I think Meghan Markle is a really good example of that. Meghan has not been seen in public that often over the past 8 months.
And she doesn't really do anything.
Tiny handful of public events. She occasionally gets, shot by paparazzi when she's at like a farmer's market or something. And people like Dan Wootton, who is currently facing a huge controversy because he's being accused of misconduct and, catfishing a bunch of guys.
You can't see me, listeners, but I'm playing the world's smallest violin for Dan Wootton.
Honestly, that man is just a worm that even all the other worms think is low. But that's a huge portion of just endlessly talking about Meghan Markle, endlessly, there's nothing that woman can do right, and complaining about how she's in everyone's way and taking up the spotlight. You're the ones talking about her. She isn't doing anything. She's gone away. You told her to go away, and she did. Mm-hmm. So the endless moving of the goalposts in the name of hate and profit, I think, is the aspect of the field that doesn't really get talked about a lot. And I'm also really aware that how I haven't seen any data on this. I would love someone to do a study on this because I am convinced that there is a huge crossover between QAnon people and people who are super into like really obsessive celebrity conspiracies. Like the people who hate Meghan Markle, who thought she faked her pregnancy, the people who thought, the people who were so horrendous to Amber Heard, people who have like weird theories about fake pregnancies in general, which is surprisingly common in celebrity. Like the list of people who are supposed to have faked being pregnant multiple times or have hidden pregnancies because they had secret relationships, all of these things. There's a thesis waiting to be written on that.
Oh, yeah. Especially at the intersection of this absolutely virulent transphobia that is so well funded and in itself using the language of conspiracy. I think part of the problem is that the language of conspiracy theories and the language of blind items is so similar that once you become fluent in one, all of a sudden you feel like you can read the other and you give them all equal weight without ever saying, all right, is this actually true? Because this is likely bizarro.
This is one of the things that bother me is about, I think, Dumois. I really dislike Dumois had constantly banging this drum. Like, first of all, Dumois is best friends with Crazy Days and Nights, which is the QAnon adjacent blog that literally has a disclaimer on its website saying, we make shit up.
Yeah, it
and
says
people
so
write everything
on
as gospel.
The site.
So, and you look at something like, to give an example, there is a really scary group of like 10 hat conspiracists who believe that Sophie Hunter, who's the wife of Benedict Cumberbatch, not only either faked all of her pregnancies or her children or dolls, but that she's essentially keeping Cumberbatch, who is a millionaire, a prisoner because she is tied into trafficking schemes with Harvey Weinstein.
Wow.
It is, I once, I was tweeting about this because I wrote an article about this.
Wow.
And one of these people replied to me and was like, but look at her fake bump. Even Frasier is judging it. And you see in the background, Kelsey Grammer is like kind of looking in her direction. And clearly the dress is like, it's got hips, basically. And it's like, yes, Frasier has pointed out that you're faking your pregnancy. No one in the world saw it except for Kelsey Grammer. It's the level of goalpost moving is genuinely disturbed. But what is so fascinating as well, and I think is worth noting, is these conspiracies are near identical from case to case.
Absolutely.
The Benedict Cumberbatch conspiracy is identical to people who think that Zawe Ashton is doing the same thing to Tom Hiddleston. It's identical to the people who believe that Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles have long been in a secret gay relationship. It's identical to, honestly, there's too many examples to name. I think another good example right now is there was a piece written on, I believe, Vulture or The Cut about the ardent Britney Spears fans who have basically become full-blown conspiracists after she's been freed from her conservatorship. They've not been able to let go of the fact that they were kind of right about one thing.
I was just going to say they were right about the one.
Another way to control her.
Yep, they were right about the one thing, but now they can't let go of that urge to dissect and come up with their own narrative. And it's really, really astonishing how often these narratives are disguising or otherwise distracting you from an actual issue. Like, for example, the whole Harry Styles, Louis Tomlinson thing, they were part of a machine that was deeply abusive to all of them. And they were working, like if you totaled the number of hours that One Direction worked, it's appalling. But we're not going to talk about the labor. We're not going to talk about whether or not they were drugged. We're not going to talk about what did you give these boys so that they could go on stage night after night after night after night and then sleep and then get up and then sleep? Were they, I mean, they've talked about, I was in my hotel room. I don't have my own key. I can't go out of my room and come back in. I have to stay here. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about how 5 people who might possibly allegedly be traumatized by the industry that they're in are grabbing onto each other because they're the only ones who understand what it's like. I don't care if they had sex. It is not my business, but I do care about basically who was harmed and traumatized for the thing that I might be enjoying. But we're not going to talk about that.
And you also, these people never really go after the actual trauma you talk about. I mean, the racism directed towards FKA Twigs when she was dating Robert Pattinson, the racism directed towards Zawe Ashton now that she's had a baby with Tom Hiddleston.
How dare she?
Staggering.
Oh, it's appalling. Meghan Markle too.
Oh, and Meghan Markle too. I mean, the misogynoir towards Black women is potent. But to give another example of one, I think another sort of flip side to the dehumanization that comes with these sort of conspiracies, because you look into this stuff and you think, do you even like this person? I fell into a weird rabbit hole of the people the Marchette stance, who believe that Kate Blanchett and Rooney Mara have been together since making Carol. Kate Blanchett's been married to the same man for 25 years. Rooney Mara just had a baby with Joaquin Phoenix. They're definitely not a thing. But the way they would talk about these women, they would talk about how they were clearly ashamed of themselves and how one of them was clearly on the spectrum and was probably self-harming and being abused by her Catholic family, and how her beard/husband was probably doing all these horrific abusive things to her. And it's like, why do you prefer this? Like this conspiracy, this image of them being miserable and abused and tormented, to the idea that actually maybe your favorite actresses are happy with their male spouses and their children and their careers and living reasonably okay lives. Like, why is that such a terrible idea to you?
We're not even going to unzip that bag.
You see this?
There's a lot of baggage there. We're not even going to unzip it. We're just not even going to. It's just nothing.
And I think this is why I connect so much of this to QAnon. Like, QAnon is built on this idea that Hollywood is this vile, child abuse heavy cesspool. And it's this idea, let's take little things that actually have a strain of truth to them. We could talk for days about the decades of abuse, of manipulation of children
God almighty,
in the industry. From, Judy Garland and Jackie Coogan, all the way to, the way that Millie Bobby Brown is objectified in the press, I think is a good example. But they don't actually talk about that. They want like a punching bag enemy that is diametrically politically opposed to their one.
Yeah.
So you see something like, actually, if you look at the vast majority of cases that are classified as trafficking in America, it is parents taking their own kids over state lines. It has nothing to do with the Jeffrey Epsteins of the Ghislaine Maxwells of the world, who, by the way, were all best friends with your political heroes.
Yeah.
Drain that swamp, but they don't want to do that.
No.
And I think celebrity is the celebrity conspiracies is a way for people to get into it, particularly women, because this is a thing that I don't think is talked about a lot. Do you know who's super into QAnon?
Women.
Is like middle-class American white women.
Yep.
And Brits, actually. There was like a QAnon protest in Dundee one day, and it was like, what are you doing here? It was very strange. But
I'm sorry. I feel like I should apologize. I feel like we exported bad shit, and I'm very sorry about that. I feel like I should apologize.
I guess this was the balance. This was the balance for us getting a Taco Bell. We had to take this as well. But
this is the price you pay for the chalupa.
So Dundee's a real city now. We have an ice hockey team and a Taco Bell.
The other thing that's so frustrating with that whole like child trafficking, everything in Hollywood is this cesspool. Putting aside the whole everything in Hollywood, like the little anti-Semitism, sprinkles on top of all of that. No one talks about the part that interests me. I sound like such a self-righteous tool, but I'm going to keep going anyway. I have a lot of strong personal feelings about this. Influencer families and people who have their children on YouTube and TikTok, nothing exists to protect those children. Not a thing. There is no Coogan's Law. There is no requirement where these kids' money or identities or safety is being looked out for. So you have these children who are growing up publicly, who get to be 18, who get to decide things for themselves and have so much work to undo all of that horrible, just self-consciousness and having been sexualized and obsessed over. Like, it's freaking creepy. And the fact that these parents are now in a position of, well, you have to make this video or we're going to lose our house. You have to make this TikTok or we can't have these nice things and we can't go to Disney. Like, you have to do this or we are all depending on you. Your sister won't eat if you don't make this video. What in the holy hop and fuck is that?
You talk about the lack of a Coogan's Law for this situation. For people who don't know, Jackie Coogan was a child star who worked with Charlie Chaplin in the 30s, was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. His parents spent all of his money. The reason that child stars have to have their money basically put into a trust fund, at least a percentage of it, is because of him. Because when he turned 18, he realized that he broke, but he was in so much debt because his parents, I think it was his mom and his stepdad actually, but they spent everything and more.
Yeah.
He had to basically scrape from the bottom up to keep acting, and he acted well into adulthood. He's Uncle Fester in the TV show The Addams Family. But there's nothing protecting influencer kids. There's nothing protecting even traditional child actors who are part of like the internet sphere now. There was an article on Lainey Gossip that talked about Millie Bobby Brown was going to all these conventions where she was signing autographs and taking pictures. Because that's technically not counted as labor in the way that like being on the set of Stranger Things is, she could be bussed from convention to convention and charge like $100 for a picture and an autograph, spend all day having people like glom onto her in this way, including people old enough to maybe be her grandparents, and then walk away with the money. There was a piece in the Hollywood Reporter that said the guys from Stranger Things, Andrew Lincoln and Norman Reedus, were walking out of hotels with literal trash bags full of $20 bills, because that's how much money they could make on these things.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing like that is regulated.
Nope.
And there's no push from these people who claim to care so much about children to do that.
Nope.
Because that involves actually dealing with a lot of really complicated issues in terms of the law. The law is so behind on this, but there's really very little drive from that. And also from the corporations that make money. YouTube is doing screw all to care about this, because they make a crap ton of money from family bloggers, from kids opening up their toys, from all of this stuff. TikTok is currently just terrifying rampage of this stuff as well. And it's happening at a speed as well. Like, you can watch how many videos in a minute just flicking through your TikTok feed.
Hours.
There's no motivation to care about the adults. That's why all the actors are on strike right now. Why on earth would they care about children?
My biggest fascination is when the public narrative of someone and the private narrative of them is so far apart. And then when it falls apart, it's kind of dramatic. Like Lizzo has that problem right now. The narrative behind the scenes and the narrative, the public persona, are so far apart. And it's crashing down drastically faster than most people, probably because she's a fat Black woman.
I definitely think that's part of it. And I think it's also that she is, I haven't seen this covered as much, the people that are accusing her of sexual harassment. And I think that's something is front and center. What she's being accused of is sexual harassment. You've seen a lot of the headlines saying accused of fat phobia and sexual harassment. And obviously the former is a very important matter, but it definitely feels like it's being framed in a way where it's like, we can now dismiss everything Lizzo has ever said about body positivity and, reclaiming fatness as something that should not be morally or ethically judged. You've definitely seen, I think that you see this a lot with celebrities, especially anyone that's part of a marginalized community, this idea that they immediately become the king or queen of that movement, whether they have positioned themselves or not. Like, I would not say Lizzo was selling herself necessarily as the almighty leader of body positivity. There are certainly other voices in that sphere and have been for a very long time.
Absolutely.
But it is a thing that happens with celebrities. I think another example would be Dylan Mulvaney, who is now is a perfectly lovely TikToker who does musical theatre and just seems like a sweetheart, and is now essentially in the face of the hard right-wing transphobes, is basically the face of all trans women ever, and she is responsible for all their problems, and she is the punching bag through which TERFs can basically project all of their nonsense onto. I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so fascinated with celebrity culture and why it's become my kind of go-to topic as what I talk about. And frankly, I'll talk about anything you pay me to write about, the joys of freelancing. But I do find that this is a forever relevant topic. I mean, the past year alone, we could go into the Ariana Grande, Ethan Slater thing. We could go into Ned from the Try Guys being the wife guy who cheated and how that spun into a whole thing. Those
are totally related too. Yeah. They have a lot of the same.
Definitely.
Almost like it's if there's 10 notes, those two stories strike several of the same notes.
Yeah, and I am actually a Try Guys fan, so when that happened, I was in this position of like, I can actually talk about it because I watched their videos. They were like they still are to an extent, my go-to like background noise. So I was like, no, you don't understand. I actually understand this in a way that like, oh, it's the BuzzFeed guys, you won't. So I fully like threw my weight onto my Slack chat at work and was like, no, this is my assignment. No offense to everyone else. But
I imagine you in the Slack chat drawing your sword, like, no one talks about this but me.
Just firing the gifts at each other. It's like, no. Sorry, I'm putting my foot down. The foot is down. But
and that's another example of the public and the private being so far apart. And I always look at that and I'm like, doesn't the dissonance give you a headache? Isn't it hard to maintain that public persona when the reality behind it is so far away? Doesn't that give you a headache?
Oh,
no one ever gets a headache.
And I think it's so interesting as well as how often you don't even need to necessarily maintain that public image. It can have been destroyed a long time ago, and frankly, there will be a subset of your fans that will forever cling to it.
Thank you again for being part of the podcast Patreon. Your support means everything. And I really, really love thinking about what popular gossip stories and what celebrity narratives say about the society in which they are happening. And you know I'm a big fan of looking at topics that are often dismissed as frivolous, meaningless, or silly. Made a whole website about it. Maybe you've heard of it. Either way, thank you so much for being part of the Patreon community. Have a great day.